because I think it's very appropriate. As Linda said, this is the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that's appropriate because that came in after the Second World War. It was actually Eleanor Roosevelt and John Humphrey, who was a Canadian, who helped bring that to United Nations. And we know in that war, there were 72 million lives lost, many of them children and community members, many of them through the Holocaust and through genocide, different genocides besides the Holocaust, before and after. And so it's very applicable that we're talking today in human rights and the protection of children in armed conflicts as a theme today. The 2023, this year's theme for Human Rights Day is freedom, equality, and justice for all. I think it's important that we all strive for that. And just so you know, if there's going to be a whole bunch starting tomorrow, a whole bunch of great sessions that are being put on by the John Humphrey Center. And it's every day, if you go online, they've got the Human Rights Convention that people are going to be attending from around the world, but it's based out of Alberta here. That organization is putting on some really good sessions. The number 50. This is the 50th anniversary of the Human Rights Commission and our legislation. We were one of the first provinces to put under that legislation. It was actually under the Lougheed government. And it's important to realize the work that Albertans have had done to bring that legislation and bring it to life through the community, through participation, through challenging laws. And it's something that we strive and ask everyone to do. So this year, if we're asking people 50 for 50, the hashtag 50 for 50. So go on, and if you do, even coming here today, you could do something, you know, saying you came here and put hashtag 50 for 50. We're asking all Albertans to do something for 50 minutes this year on human rights, at least 50 minutes. So you'll be here for longer than that, I think. 48, the number 48. This organization, the Alberta Civil Liberties, has been around for 48 years. And it is such an honor. And the people who have made this work, and it started out as many different names and became the Alberta Civil Liberties Research Center. And it's a strong agency. They've done great work in community. They've helped corporate partners address their human rights and civil liberty issues, community members, and it's been great to partner on many issues, as Linda said, on behalf of the commission. It's been great to partner with them. 15 years, that's how many times I've been here as a member of the Human Rights Commission. I think I've attended all of them since I've been here in the 15 years. And to hear the speakers and the different awards that have given out, and listen and to the great individuals that are doing the work, but as well as organizations and the projects that they've shared and the topics over that 15 years, it's been amazing. One, all it takes is one person to make a difference. And I want you to take that home with you, everyone here and online, is individuals here in this room, like my friend Linda. She has made huge differences in advocating, self-advocating, helping people learn. It's been great. Other people on this campus, and one of my friends, Darren Lund, who passed away during COVID, was a professor in education. Huge ally and activist for many different issues and helping educators. All it takes is one person to do that. Whatever sector you're going to work in or you're working in now, it just takes one. I was honored this year to go down to Cape Town, South Africa, to get that award that Linda was talking about. And I spent some time with Desmond Tutu's family, with the Desmond and Leela Tutu Foundation. It was just powerful to see what one person can do and what he was able to do with Nelson Mandela. But each of them were individuals working on their own, not actually a lot of the time with each other on the issues to break apartheid. And they were doing it with themselves, with their families, with community members. And I want to leave you a quote from Desmond Tutu. If you are neutral in situation of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. Powerful when you think about it. And so we all can make a difference. Every one of us, where we are, with our family, with our friends, with our organizations, whether it's within individual racism or discrimination or systemic, the systems we all work in, whether it's in educational, whether it's in corporate, whether it's in government. I'll leave you with another quote. Nelson Mandela: "It is in your hands to make a better world for all those who live in it." Remember, it's in your hands, each one of you. One of the quotes, if you go onto the UN Human Rights website for its Human Rights Day, is, "The time for human rights is now." Don't wait until you're my age or Linda's. The time for each one of you is now. And the hashtag you can use on that is Act for Rights Now. So I want to give you all that challenge, and I'm enjoying this talk. All my relations.
Thank you so much, Cam. Mikhail's going to give you a small token of appreciation because I can't whip over there. Peter's given me strict instructions about these wires here. So thank you so much. I bet you can imagine what it might be. Our next two speakers are staff people at the Alberta Civil Liberties Research Centre. First of all, we have Temitope Oluleye. How did I do? Tell me again. I like to get it right. Okay, well, anyway, she's worked with us for a number of years. She's our human rights educator, and she goes out to schools and she develops curricular material. She's been working the last while on sexual harassment in the workplace. And she's a wonderful employee, and she's very passionate about human rights. So that's to my immediate left. And I'll have to give you a bonus for mispronouncing your name. I'm sorry. I get Mikhail's name down bad too. So then we have Martha McManus, who's a peace and conflict transformation specialist who worked with UNICEF and worked in collaboration with UN agencies while working in Iraq, Sri Lanka, the EU, the UK, and the Great Lakes region of Africa. Martha's research and academic work in her 3 master's degrees include counseling psychology, peace studies, and philosophy studying trauma and resilience with Canadian peacekeepers. Her awards include the Calgary Woman of Distinction, the World Peace Scholar, the Global Citizen Award, and a few years back, she won our Alberta Civil Liberties Award before you were working for us. Yep. A lifelong commitment to peace building, human rights, and children's rights brings Martha to an optimistic view of our future. Well, we could certainly use that. I added that on, yeah. As we work to live peacefully in our own lives with family, community, and all our relations. So I'm gonna move over and let these 2 young ladies take over. Oh, you need to speak to Peter. You can use this. Okay, so that you don't have me harassing you. Clear now? Yes. You want some water? We're trying out new equipment today. So you have to bear with us, but so far it's working really well. So that's awesome.
Yeah, hello everyone. So we have a few slides to go through as we talk about the international. I think I need to mute this. It's echoing. No, I want to mute that. Anyway, okay. As we talk about the international human rights protection for children in armed conflicts. So we start with the definition of who a child is. And we'll be looking at the definition of a child as written in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. A child is defined as anyone below the age of 18 years. So we see that that's broad. And we know that the rights of a child are protected under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. So as we go forward, you may see the acronym UNCRC is just the short form of it. So what is an armed conflict? We need to define all of this so we can give it context. An armed conflict, according to, I picked this from the International Committee of the Red Cross because I thought it was really succinct. An armed conflict arises whenever there is fighting between states being countries or nations, or whenever there's a protracted armed violence between government authorities and organized armed groups, or just between armed groups. Now, there are two types of armed conflicts. We have international armed conflicts and we have non-international armed conflict. And the difference is that an international armed conflict occurs between two or more opposing states. And in those situations, one state uses armed forces or armed force against the other state, or it could be more than one state. Now, in the case of non-international armed conflict, it takes place within the territory of a state. So sometimes it could be between governmental forces and non-governmental armed groups, and does not involve the armed forces of other countries or other states. And that's why it can sometimes be referred to as internal armed conflict. So let's look at the laws that protect children in armed conflicts, because sadly, as Cam and Linda said, the vulnerable group of people, and as we've seen in recent times, they're often the victims of armed conflicts. So we have human rights laws and international human rights laws that apply to children in times of armed conflict. But both set of laws can be classified under the umbrella in international law. Now, the difference would be that human rights apply to children at all times, whether in the times of peace or in times of war, in times of armed conflict. Now, international humanitarian law has been dubbed the law of armed conflict. So that applies in situations of armed conflicts only. And just as a refresher, let's talk about human rights. We know that the only qualification you need to have human rights is to be born and to be a human being. So human rights protect the dignity of a person. We know that they're interdependent, so you cannot separate one human right from the other human right. They're inalienable and they're fundamental to human life. And they belong to all of us, whether you're young, whether you're old, whether you're male, you're female, whether you have a disability or not, no matter the color of your skin, no matter what race you belong to, we all have human rights. And it's good to know that we have responsibilities attached to those rights as well. So in as much as your rights and my rights have to be respected, we also have the responsibility to respect the rights of other people. And as Cam mentioned, John Humphrey was very instrumental to the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a major human rights instrument. And, the first article says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And this applies to children as well. So let's look at IHL, that's International Humanitarian Law, and how it applies to children in times of armed conflict. There's a principle under international humanitarian law, and that principle is that non-combatant civilians, there are times that civilians are drafted to carry arms. So non-combatant civilians must be distinguished from combatants, and they must be exempt from either incidental or collateral damage to the highest or maximum extent possible during times of armed conflict. Now, in armed conflict, civilians, non-combatants are granted general protections, which basically ensure that they're treated humanely, So human rights are not suspended in times of armed conflicts. And that's the difference. It operates whether it's a time of armed conflict or not. But international humanitarian law goes ahead to protect civilians, and children are also covered by these same general protections that adults may have. But in addition, children have an extra layer of protection given to them. And these additional protections are referred to as special protections, and we'll look at those shortly. In some situations, some children are coopted to carry arms and they become combatants. So we have the cases of child soldiers. And you may wonder, well, if a child is carrying arms and is fighting, do they lose the special protections? The answer is no. So children who directly participate in armed conflict do not lose these special protections. So let's look at some of the laws. I'll just run through them. You may have heard of some of them. We have the Geneva Convention of 1949. So basically it governs how humans are treated or how armed conflict is carried out. Then we have additional protocols to the Geneva Convention. We have the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, as I mentioned earlier. And then there is the International Labour Office Convention 182 on the elimination of the worst forms of child labor. And, I think Article 3 of that specifically mentions the time of armed conflict. Then there's an optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the involvement of children in armed conflict, because they found out that the UNCRC didn't go far enough because of age. And there was an additional protocol to add extra layer of protection for children. Then there's the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and there are some Security Council resolutions. So I just want to go through some provisions of the Child Rights Convention. So similar to what we have in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, every child has the right to life. They have the right to develop and grow. They have the right to have an identity. They have the right to have parents. And then they have the right to family reunification. They have the right to refugee status with or without a parent. And we see in Article 38 that they have the right to not participate in armed conflict. They have the right to have an adequate standard of living and the right to be protected from all harm. So as I'm going through these articles, I just want us to see how those rights may be violated or infringed upon in times of armed conflicts. Children have a right to be informed and educated. They have a right to have thoughts and beliefs. They have the right to express feelings and opinions. They have the right to have privacy. And of course, the right to associate with others. They also have the right to belong to a culture or religion and the right to be treated fairly. So let's look at some of those special protections for children in armed conflict. the additional protocols to the Geneva Convention. So that additional protection came into force in 1977. Article 77 says that children shall be the object of special respect and shall be protected against any form of indecent assault. The parties to the conflict shall provide them with the care and aid they require, whether because of their age or for any other reason. But as we look around the world today and as we celebrate the International Human Rights Day, we know that rights of children still are being violated. Now, special protections relate to a lot of issues, such as evacuation and special zones. What is happening in today's world in the times of armed conflict? Assistance and care, identification, family reunification, and unaccompanied children. I was reading in the news, I think it was 2 days ago, and there's a child who had been orphaned. She's one of the hostages that was just released in one of this, in the exchange that just happened recently. They're trying to even find a family. Education. Think about how education is affected in times of armed conflict. Cultural environment. Oftentimes, we know that cultural institutions are destroyed, buildings destroyed, demolished. How does that affect children? Children are arrested. And this special protections also apply to detained or interned children, because we have some children that actually are detained, and exemption from death penalty. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by all countries except one. Actually, the Convention on the Rights of the Child has been celebrated as the most widely ratified human rights legislation. But there's only one country that has not ratified that. But this convention extended the reach of Article 77 to non-international armed conflict and urged state parties to ensure that children less than 15 years do not participate in direct hostilities, because sometimes during internal conflict, children are co-opted, they're recruited into the armed groups. So let's look at the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the involvement of children in armed conflict. This was fairly recent in 2000. You may note that, as I stated earlier, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, gave that provision and was somewhat persuasive, but the optional protocol went further and it provides stronger protection for children. So it prohibited compulsory recruitment into armed forces of children under 18 years, whereas the main convention before had said children above under 15 should not be forced to join the army. But this has now prohibited compulsory recruitment into armed forces of children under 18 years. It also provided that safe parties must take feasible measures to ensure that members of their armed forces under 18 years should not participate in direct hostilities. And then if we look at Article 3 of that optional protocol, it says that state parties shall raise minimum age for voluntary recruitment from 15 years. But there are some exemptions. Military academies are exempted from this rule. And then armed groups, distinct from national armed forces, so should not, under any circumstances, recruit or use in hostilities persons under 18 years. And state parties must take legal measures to criminalize such practices. So I think that was a wider net. And then if you look at this picture, it may seem far-fetched. Are these children? Is that a child? Is that a boy? Or is that a soldier? This picture was from the Red Cross's website. Sadly, these are child soldiers. These are children that should still be on playgrounds playing. What do they know? So let's look at some of the challenges that children face in armed conflicts. The United Nations Security Council presents annual reports on children and armed conflict. And they identified 6 areas. And these 6 areas were first enumerated in 1996. These 6 areas are the areas where they identify that children are mostly affected in times of armed conflict, and it's been dubbed the 6 grave violations. The first grave violation is child recruitment and use. Martha is going to speak about that. She's going to show us some pictures. Some children are recruited, they are used in times of armed conflicts. So imagine those 2 little boys that you saw. What do they know? How do they even pull the trigger? How is their judgment, sound enough to reason in times of armed conflict? How about killing and maiming? A lot of children lose their lives in times of armed conflict. Some that don't lose their lives are maimed. And of course, that affects them for the rest of their lives. Abductions, the Geneva Conventions talks about this, and it says, usually when children are abducted, many times they're turned into sex slaves, they're turned into spies. They're used in despicable ways. And this is a grave violation against children. How about rape and other forms of sexual violence? A lot of young children, boys and girls, become sexual slaves, and they serve the ugly needs of the adult combatants. They're raped, and a lot of them lose their lives. Attacks on schools and hospitals. This is prohibited, but sadly we see that even though it's prohibited, it keeps going on today. And that affects the education of the children. Hospitals should be safe places, but in the place where children are being cared for, many combatants directly target those places and children lose their lives. Or those that don't lose their lives, that need care, have nowhere to go to. And then denial of humanitarian access. We can't be ostriches. We see it on the news every day. The other day I saw a water truck that was going to deliver, it was humanitarian aid. And one party targeted the water truck and blew it up. So imagine the impact on children. So like I said earlier, the Security Council report is released annually. The report for last year was released in June this year. And I'm quoting directly from our report. It records 27,180 grave violations against children in 24 country situations and 1 regional situation, that's the Lake Chad Basin, 2,880 of which occurred prior to 2022, but were only verified in 2022. It notes that the most violations took place in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Israel, and the occupied Palestinian territory, Somalia, Ukraine, and Syria. So that's the report that was released in June. Like I said, in armed conflicts, children are among the most vulnerable, and many times they're exploited as suicide bombers, child combatants. Sometimes they're sent out as spies, and they become sex slaves, and they're subjected to inhumane treatment. Sometimes when they are interred or detained, they are put in adult prisons. And what the Geneva Convention specifies is that children must be given grounds to play. They're children after all. They should be given a place to learn. But many times in times of armed conflict, that's not the case. Schools and hospitals are affected many times by armed conflicts. And there's a declaration signed by many states, a Safe Schools Declaration. But has that deterred schools being targeted, hospitals being targeted? No, the answer is no. We see that child education is often negatively affected, and many times too along gender lines. So let's look at some real life examples. Syria. Syria ratified the Child Rights Convention in 1993. We know that the war there is still, I mean, it's not so much spoken about now, but it's still there. And so there's a refugee crisis, and education of children is going on in refugee camps. And we know that Article 22 of the Child Rights Convention specifically offers special protection to refugee children. But it's a particular challenge for international community to meet the needs of children in refugee camps. Martha is going to show you some live pictures. And the real life situation is ISIS specifically targets children for indoctrination, and they often use children in armed combat. That 2022 report that I mentioned, it has been noted that there's an increase in cases of recruitments and use of children in combat roles. The world has moved on, but the children are still being affected. Per that report, the number of child casualties increased by 30% from 2021. And explosives were noted as the leading cause of killing and maiming of children. So it's almost like a double whammy. They're maimed, hospitals are affected, who treats them? About 5 million children live in contaminated areas, leading to possible injury and death. Afghanistan has been in the news. They ratified the Child Rights Convention in March 1994, and it's reported to be one of the most dangerous places to live on earth, with 45 years expectancy, and is recorded as the worst place to be a child. Children easily serve jail terms for their parents. Afghanistan has one of the world's lowest literacy rates. Only 50% of the children in Afghanistan attend school, and the instruction is mostly Quran-based. Upwards of 31% of children in Afghanistan are working. 28% of that 31% are boys, and they work as street vendors, they work in workshops, they traffic drugs. And then the National Police Force recruits children. Afghanistan, as of today, is the only country with a restriction on girl education. It is recorded that about 2.5 million Afghan girls and young women are not in the education system. Nearly 30% of girls had never entered primary education. And the girls require a relative when they move about outside their homes. And so this often prevents the adolescent girls from confidential access to health. 34% girls are working. Well, maybe a bit of a light there is that primary education is free, but girls are not allowed to go to school after grade 6, except to an Islamic school known as madrasa. And quite recently too, we saw that some girls were supposed to go to Dubai to study, but the Taliban stopped them. So that's how education is affected along gender lines. Now let's look at Iraq. Iraq signed the Child Rights Convention in 1994. Over 10 million people are affected by the war. Of those 10 million, we have 4.7 million children affected. 3.3 million people are internally displaced. In 2013, women, youth, and children were directly targeted in deadly attacks on schools and playgrounds. And UNICEF responded to that in 2016. They increased their funding appeal to ensure that the most vulnerable children continue to access emergency supplies, safe water, education, and protection services. In Iraq, the conflict has resulted in limited education and economic opportunities for young people, particularly girls. UNICEF has made some important advances, encouraging improvements in the quality of education. So they took the Back to School campaign to 5 refugee camps, and that campaign promoted access to education to approximately 50,000 refugees in camps and over 126,000 people in the host communities. It's reported this year that about 680,000 estimated people are internally displaced, or children, you know, and returning children face obstacles to education. Some estimated 699,000 children are in need of child protection services. So a lot of this information is on the United Nations website. If you go to UNICEF's website, you'll find it there. It is estimated that 15% of children will need humanitarian assistance due to water scarcity and disease. For instance, cholera. There's no clean water, then they get cholera. There are no hospitals, then they die. Child labor is still prevalent. And at work, children report being harassed and feeling unsafe. And many times they're not given the proper equipment at work, and then they become maimed or injured. So I'm going to hand over to Martha, who has been in some of these situations, to show us some of those pictures.
Is this turned on, just ready to go, hey? So, okay, so I'm going to stand over here so all the pictures are easily seen. Does the owl know I'm here? Owl? I don't show up on the screen for, that's okay? You want me to stand over there? I don't know. This modern owl has got the best of us. So I'm going to take you to Congo. Do you remember that Timmy mentioned DRC Congo? Well, I went to Congo, and I want you to picture yourself laying at night in your screen for your bug screen. You've got a curtain around you, keep the bugs away, because Congo has a lot of malaria and stuff. So you want to avoid all the bugs and mosquitoes. And you hear the noise of birds at night. But you know what? Birds aren't really out at 11 and 12 o'clock at night. It's actually the calls between the youth groups and the rebels going alley and house to house to see who's open, who's locked, and who's available to break into. Because in disrupted societies, there are no access to payment, no salaries. I don't even think teachers are paid. And so people are scrambling in the streets to find open spaces to steal food and sometimes abduct kids. So this picture is of children who came by way of the Lord's Resistance Army. The Lord's Resistance Army is a group that maraud into a village. They've given the little kids a buzzer, a whistle to blow, so people come outside of their houses, and the adults are slaughtered and the children are abducted. Those children then become child soldiers. So this is a rehabilitation group. This is a group who take the child soldiers who've managed to escape, most of them don't, and rehabilitate. They're teaching child rights right here. The same things that Tammy went over, human child rights, that's what they're learning. This particular group, if you just imagine going north of Goma on sort of a weird road, because volcanoes have hit DRC Goma. So it's a pretty disastrous place. But as you go up here, these little kids are living in the little space being looked after. And if you see this next slide, this little girl was there. She's 12. She was 12 at this time, the picture. The Lord's own army does not want their children to escape. This little girl was dropped off at the gates because she was so devastated in her life, she was not eating. And they just didn't know what to do with her. So they gave her to the rehabilitation center. At 12, she had given birth to a child who didn't make it. This little girl was just not eating or functioning at all in this place. They were doing their best to try to help and support her, but they made her in charge of the chickens. Now, I don't know if any of you have a cat or a dog or a pet to know. I personally have never cuddled a chicken. I have not had that experience. But this little girl was supposed to feed the chickens. And she was not very inspired in life. And so she wasn't inspired in her chicken feeding desires too. So what she did is for a day, she kind of forgot to spread the seed. And day 2, she didn't either. And then somebody said, "Aren't you feeding the chickens?" And she thought, well, she better go and check them. And she got over to the chickens and they were ecstatic to see her. Now, I don't know what a chicken looks like when they're ecstatic, but they were very hungry. So that's a big part of it. She felt excited that something, this case chickens, thought she mattered enough to worth living for. So she started involved with her chickens and she started picking them up and she started cuddling them, and she noticed we got more eggs from the chickens the more they cuddled the chickens, and so soon and then they propagated more chickens. So she was hard at it with these chickens, and she was so excited about her chickens that when people would come to visit the rehabilitation center, she'd show them her chickens and tell them about it. And a local farming group, this is about 6-7 months after she'd been involved with her chickens, came and they said, "You're amazing with these chickens. Would you like to come and work at our farm as part of our family, as one of our children, and help with the chickens?" And this little girl moved from being abducted, raped, child soldier, to now a firmly placed, healthy DRC farmer north of Goma. So there's good stories here. These girls, though, ooh, you should be very afraid of these girls. They're all convicts. Dum, dum, dum. What happened was in Iraq, when the invading forces came, they saw kids standing in groups around the neighborhood or whatever. And rather than have them all race home and say we're being invaded, they just arrested the kids. So when I was working with UNICEF, we had 60 lawyers we hired to go in and hear these girls' cases. They were picked up, and this is 4 years after they've been detained. They've still had no legal responses to their sentencing, partly because Iraq didn't arrest and criminalize their children. They didn't have the capacity to detain children. They didn't believe it was right. So when the United States invade, they had to then find a place in the adults' places. So these little girls have now to get heard and go to court to have their case heard. But they've been away from no contact from family for 4 or 5 years. They don't know where their families are. And their families, one of the issues we have is they are noticeably, if we can locate them, reticent to have these people come back. What were they sentenced for? They must have done something wrong. What are they going to be like now? What are our girls going to be? So we are now trying to work with girls, sort of like in the South when they had the slaves in the South, the United States rescued out underground to the north for safety. We're trying to provide underground relief for these little girls to get relief out of the criminal system with court cases, and then to be moved to Erbil or northern communities where they might have a chance. Now, okay, next slide. This little girl is one of my favorites. She has that look on her face like, you do something or I'll rip your face off. She's part of the camps. A lot of the people who ended up getting in Iraq, you saw the numbers of the camps that you were talking about with the schools. This little girl is feisty. And she's on a mission. I thought you'd enjoy seeing her as comic relief. There are real children out there in Iraq functioning as best they can while war is going on. These are the camps. You can see in numbers of tents and stuff that are going on. We've been working in the camps trying to create schools and places. The biggest issue, trying to get guards in front of the bathrooms so the girls don't get attacked on the way just to the toilet. This is another little boy who's just peeking around the corner of the slides. There are, of course, in Palestine, there are hundreds of people encamped as refugees all over the place. But these kids are looking at the long haul. If you remember in Iraq, there were Kurds, Tamils, there were Kurds, and there were Shia, and there were a lot of communities. I'm trying to remember, Sunnis is the other one. And we got lawyers for our community of people. Half of the lawyers had to be women because I was supposed to be choosing them. And then a third Sunni, a third Shia, and a third Kurds, so that we could get kids who were going to get court representation to have a person that they could connect with. So in these camps, the kids' cases are also heard. Now, I want to talk about Sri Lanka, because I went to Sri Lanka as Save the Children. Our first program was trying to help children in Sri Lanka as they had a war between the Tamils and the Sinhalese. I was going January 1st, I think. And my friend called and she said, I'm sorry, you're not going. And I said, why am I not going? She said, well, Martha, there was a tsunami hit. And I thought, yeah, I'm still going. All the more reason. The tsunami hit, of course, and it wiped out all the shorelines up and down. In one of the people who was one of my people I worked with in Ahimsa was she and her husband took their 6-year-old little girl down to the beach for the first ride on an elephant, because full moon is a Buddhist celebration. So they were down on the beach and little girl got on the elephant. And the elephant just peeled out of there, just raced to the top of the hill. And the man who was with the elephant managing was running, and mom and dad are running, and the little girl's holding on for dear life. And they got up to the top of the hill and the tsunami hit. The elephant had a sense of what was going on, and the family were saved and watching as the tsunami came through the beaches. So we had two issues. We had helping children with war, and the current war still going on. And we had issues with the tsunami recovery and many kids without homes, families. This particular place shows you there was a whole wreckage. This was quite inland. So the tsunami had come, and it comes and it comes again. It goes once, it goes twice, and it comes in a third time. If the coral has been mined, it removes the natural barrier. We had young youth who were in their 12, 13-year-old teenagers who were going to help rebuild the youth center. So we gathered all the cement blocks and stuff, and they were creating a youth center where the spot where it used to be. What happened, of course, they were working the youth center. That was a very good job for them to have. But what happens is the government had various people come in to help, and the military who came in were told, evacuate the whole beach. So they plowed over all the kids' efforts because the beaches had to be cleared. So all the fishermen who were trying to make huts to be close to their fishing again, and the children, that was all gone, because now the beaches are full of Hyatts and Regencies and fancy nice places to stay on the beach. So back to Sri Lanka here. Here's another section that had to be rebuilt and regenerated. And the whole culture of children's needs was a main goal of our work. So what we had to do, you were talking about the issues with schools. First of all, the schools had been wiped out. So what happens is, what I was impressed with, China brought in the biggest tents and supplies to put in temporary schooling for people. It was amazing and exciting to see the globe respond. But the children in Sri Lanka were adamant that they were going to continue to go to school, and they wear white uniforms. Now, somebody can perhaps explain to me, Timmy, did you guys wear white uniforms? People in warm cultures where there's not a washing machine to do it every day, they go to school in these pure white uniforms. As a mother of children, I only can't imagine how I'd have never been able to do that. But Sri Lanka was a place also that is desperate to help children now. One of the most interesting people I worked with there was a lawyer from the UK who volunteered to come for 6 months and work pro bono, and just for the cost of being there, to help with children's rights and the laws and the rights of children in the communities. There's incredible opportunities. If I do my work right, all of you will say, how can I sign up for something like that? I mean, they've not hired me to get you signed up, but I'll do my best. This is Canada's contribution. Canada put in all these things that are desalination things, because of course there is no clean water to drink. There's no pure water to drink. So the desalination gifts is what Canada sent in. These mothers working in the light of just a light of a lantern to teach schooling. What happens is we think about schools and we think about buildings. What happens in Romania, where I was, in Sri Lanka, in Iraq, in Congo, in Colombia, in South America, even out here in many of the indigenous populations, you have parents desperately trying to deliver education and learning, even when there aren't always materials or there isn't even electricity or water or food. Because education is the thing that's going to spearhead transformation for many of these children's lives. Am I going on too much? I have. So one of the things that I want you all to think about during your days and your weeks is to say, how is it I as a person, as Cam asks, how is I as a person could maybe donate a book to some place that needs one? I could maybe help reading with children. What we're looking at here are 2 kids who are an example. Now, if we're trying to meet the needs of kids in populations that are children in armed conflict, we try to reach all kids, but just as in our own communities, sometimes the most disadvantaged are people who are needing access, people who are having physical issues. And these 2 remind us that even within war-affected things, we think of the war, but this is just meeting the needs of the least of these, the biggest disadvantaged children. This little girl, I used to know the word street people because I worked with kids who lived in the streets in Calgary, so I knew that. This little girl, children of color everywhere are racialized, they are stereotyped, they are prejudiced and disadvantaged everywhere. She lives on the streets. And even in these efforts we have in broader communities around the world, we still, once again, have ardent racism against people of color. And this little girl, She liked to have her picture taken. These pictures are all pictures that are people have given permission to UNICEF to use with these pictures. This is one of the pictures that strikes the impact of children surrounded by war and weapons and danger. I mean, we see war and weapons around the world and their impact on these kids. But these kids live it and they see it. And these kids in Congo, one of the biggest issues that I co-presented very often with Romeo Dallaire, who was one of United Nations peacekeepers. And he said, picture yourself as a peacekeeper. And there's a child with an AK-40, AK whatever, those fancy, big, scary guns. And he said, that child is going to kill the people that I'm protecting. But how and where in my humanity do I understand or know how to kill a child? He said, the first thing you see is they're a child. Second thing you see is your life's in danger. These are the dilemmas that we are facing as a culture right now. And when Cam or Linda, one of them said, Martha's optimistic, you kind of think, how is this possible? When this is going on in life with these kids going through all this and she's working with them, how is she optimistic? Because I think we're coming to a saturation point where the chaos and the absolute inhumanity of war that we're in the middle is just devastating. And it's at a peak crescendo that just has to change. And I've met these little change makers, these kids who are going to make a difference and be ardent in educating. And we've taught them with the curriculum we developed with UNICEF, how to handle conflict, how to deal with anger, how to set healthy boundaries, how to communicate, negotiate differences. We are transforming child by child people who will grow up and make a difference. And for my mind, as I look out at you, I hope some of you will even consider spending time. It's okay, all your students, I'm kidding them. It seems to me that it's a chance to say, okay, more than just writing an exam on the Article 3.75 or 960 Charter, whatever, it's not a tray, is to also say, what could I do with taking some of this learning and pay it forward? Just to one other person, or maybe two, or maybe a small community. So I'm putting the names, the faces, and the stories to the children that we were talking about with the children in armed conflict. And I hope that as we have time for questions or answers or any issues, that you can start to think about, how does that impact my life? Or what is it you'd like to find out from Timmy or me or Cam? You can ask him questions too, because his life sounds pretty exotic. So we're going to ask for, here's some suggestions for prevention and remedial actions. More enlightenment about how armed conflicts affect children is to be provided worldwide. States should educate their armed forces about provisions of the law related to recruitment and use of children as combatants. States in needs to understand their obligations and respect for children's rights. Enforcement mechanisms need to be strengthened. One of the things I was going to ask Timmy, because she said in her thing that if a child is carrying a gun, is involved as a soldier, they no longer have the same rights. They do still. Even if, okay. So does anybody have any questions for me, for Timmy, for Cam, for anybody?
Thank you, Martha. questions about anything that you've heard or doesn't make not clear?
We do have cake, but
They get that out.
was there a requirement? Each person has to have one? No.
Yes, we've got several people here who can answer questions because my staff are also brilliant. But
Yes. Yes, the question you're asking, we need to repeat so that you can hear in the thing that you were saying with all these laws and rules and governance, 3,000 children have died in the Middle East right now. And what is it we can do to make that accountable to? Yeah, but we have to protect and try to prevent with the children. But on the other arm, then you're saying, what can we do to make people accountable? Temi, that's your question, or is it your question?
Yeah, I want a minor to answer. It's
Oh, but
national
she-
law.
Go ahead. So you can answer? Yes, you're the law lady.
Oh, I was saying that minor is an international law expert, so maybe answer the question. Well, like we said in the suggestions, you'll see that we said enforcement. Sometimes international law is not domestic law, right? But really, state parties need to be educated about. If I got your question right, because I was trying to walk around, so I hope I'm not mixing it up. They need more enlightenment, but importantly, I think there needs to be the penalties for maybe violating those need to be strengthened. And I don't know, that's where international law is international law, but maybe I'll just ask Linda and Cam to also add this. It's there, it's an obligation on them, but do they respect it? We see it being violated time and time and time again. And so it's a dilemma that we have in the world right now. The laws are there, but who enforces it? I mean,
So this has been an ongoing criticism of international law, especially originally, most of the remedies seemed quite weak. So it would be like, oh, Canada, you did something bad, shame on you. And you were supposed to still have this wonderful human rights, reputation. And so we're going to try to fix it. And we all know that that's not happening, right? And so this has been known. And there are, with the international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions also have the same problem. The enforcement is not great. But in the last few years, we have seen the development of something called the International Criminal Court, where there is some accountability. Of course, there are some limits on it. You have to agree to be bound by the court. And, if you're one of these people that likes to annihilate children or other people, you may not wish to be bound by the court, but they have taken some leaders recently to that court. But it is one of the leading criticisms of international human rights. On the other hand, imagine what it would be like if we didn't have any international human rights to set the standard of behavior, or what the world as a group thinks is the right way to behave. But it is the leading criticism of international human rights and the international humanitarian law and the UN. And also there are a lot of politics in there. So they'll pass some sort of resolution, and then the country that's doing the wrong thing will, you know, veto it. So it's a long-standing challenge we have. And in the meantime, we see thousands of children dying, right? And most of us are horrified by that. And a lot of us feel pretty helpless. And there is a body of law, but so we need to really work on the enforcement mechanisms. That's got to be done. And CU law people, you can get out there and like I never would have thought the human rights, we'd have an international criminal court ever, and we do now. And there's actually a course on it you can take here, so and learn more about it. And I need to take that course because it's pretty new. So that would be something you know, there's hope. People are aware of the weaknesses of it. And they used to think that people would be so embarrassed, like a state like Canada would say, oh my goodness, the whole world hates us. But now, you know, states will just say, oh, well, what are you going to do about it? You know, we're not going to help you or whatever. So it is definitely a problem. I'm sorry, I can't give you anything better.
Are there other questions or time? Yes. Being involved on the ground or being involved as a lawyer in that situation, or both? So talking about, the question is how would one go about in their law career working at international law and with children's rights and these bigger areas than some of the more low? You've got the microphone. You can answer
want
that.
Me to answer? So there are opportunities even while you're in law school to do some exchanges and get like over in The Hague, stuff like that, where you can get some wonderful exposure to law, international law. And Calgary, I wouldn't call and Cam's not here anymore. I wouldn't call Calgary the hotbed of opportunity for especially international human rights law practice. So you may want to, if you're really serious about it, you may want to consider, well, of course we have the internet now, so you can do virtual things, but like a place like Ottawa, where you've got the head offices for places like Amnesty International and other organizations like that, would be a good place to investigate. Not that or start an amnesty group here. Right, we've had them off and on, and that also, if you have the chance, I know it's really tough when you get into second and third year, try to fit in some of the courses. There are some excellent courses. I feel like, and this is just a political statement, I feel like that we're negligent in not offering sufficient courses in international humanitarian law in particular, because that's a whole body of law, and we're signed on to that. We even have a statute passed, so it is completely part of our legal system. And yet, I would say most of us don't know anything about it. And I think it should be mandatory taught.
I'd also add, if you go to any of those wonderfully international conferences, there's a lot of them about, you know, the welfare of our planet. But there's also a lot of human rights and child rights conferences. You'll be sitting there next to someone who hears your story. Oh, you're interested? We could use you. I mean, I've gone all over the world doing this work just with connections. just with one person meeting and then another person, then another person. So go to one of those international conferences, save up your money to fly a ticket somewhere exotic that you'd like to go and go to the conference and say, I'm here because I don't know a lot. Because each individual situation, each country, the Congolese, even the indigenous populations in Canada, some don't have potable water. Find these areas where there's people working on that and just say, I'm here to learn. And next thing you know, you'll have offered a job.
Plus, you can volunteer at the research center, because then you'll learn about some of the issues that are out there, and you can put that on your resume in the future when you want to, if you're trying to work in one of these different. A lot of people I know who are passionate about human rights, to be honest, I would be perfectly honest with you, who want to stay in Calgary, end up doing a practice, maybe a real estate practice, but do a part of it on human rights so that they can, feed their family. But they can still follow, it's not as valued as it should be. So.
Not going to make a lot of money doing the kind of work I do, but it's very gratifying.
They're looking for new people I wish Cam was still here, that the Human Rights Commission, they're advertising, there are jobs there. But so that you have to come meet with me, I'll give you some opportunities. And I really encourage you, some of the people they have on this staff here now who have expertise in international law, human rights law, are fantastic. So I know you can't probably fit it all in, but try to take something along those lines. So because you'll learn more about the opportunities through that. And they all owe me $50.
We say.
Pardon?
I was going to say, are we saying thank you to all that? We did say thank you to them all, right?
Are we done? Are there any more questions?
We're never done till we've had the cake.
Oh yeah, you can't leave without having cake. Please, what do we do with it? It's really good too. But I do want to thank my staff for helping today, including picking up the food and organizing the online. This is the first time we've done a hybrid presentation, and I haven't seen any smoke coming off the internet, so I think we did all right. And this event will be eventually posted to our website. So if there's a part of it you'd like to watch again or learn more from, or tell your friends to watch. And I would like to thank not only my staff, but my students for coming, because I know how busy you are. And I really hope that you feel that you got something out of this event, because it's an important day to commemorate, and it's a very important issue. So thank you all, and thank you to my wonderful staff who spoke today. Please eat. Those of you online, I'm so sorry I can't mail you cake. Are there any questions of the people online? Although I would tell, can you see? Thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also, so you email me, I can get in touch with her and we can figure out something. We already have one of our computer classmates already volunteers for us.